Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you are attending live, and it looks like we have a lot of people attending live today, because everybody's got their last minute questions for the Cycle 2 applications. Feel free to start loading up the Q&A box. If you look at your toolbar, there's a Q&A box. You can start typing questions in there. I don't have a mini tutorial planned for today because I kind of was anticipating that people would show up with their frantic last minute questions. So go ahead and start typing those in. If you have something that you want to contribute to the discussion, there is a chat box, so you can put information in there. So if you are watching this as a recording, and more of you are doing so, both within our learning management system and on our open YouTube channel, this is just a reminder that today is May 29th, 2024, and everything I'm saying today is true to the best of my knowledge as of today. But things change very quickly at NIH, particularly this year. Things are going to be changing pretty quickly. So do always verify that what I'm saying is accurate now. In terms of what you should be viewing in the library now, I mean, I would imagine that anybody who is preparing to submit for a Cycle 2 deadline, which would be deadlines in June and July, you're coming into the home stretch, particularly if you're writing a new submission, R01 and A0, because those are due on June 5th. And for most of you, your internal drop deadline is 5 business days ahead. For some of you, it may be a little less. I don't think I've ever seen it less than 3 days. I've seen it as long as 2 weeks or longer if you have an internal review process. So I would imagine that most of you who are submitting for the Cycle 2s, unless it's some kind of a resubmission, are coming into the home stretch. Having said that, I'm already beginning to work with my Cycle 3 applicants, and that would be the deadlines in October and November. So if you happen to fall into that category, what you do want to watch probably is Master the R series or Master the K series, Chapter 1, which is all about preparation and the way you go into the reporter website at the idea phase before you write anything up and start vetting the idea and how to figure out which type of mechanism, which specific NOFO, whether there's a NOC that might work for your project idea, whether NIH might be interested in your project idea, speaking with the program officer, looking for study sections, figuring out if it even goes to a standing study section. All of those very early prep steps, we are already moving our Cycle 3 applicants through that process and having them work their way through the checklist. In terms of NIH updates, there are a lot coming down the pike. I know that I think next Wednesday, I'm registered to attend an NIH webinar on changes to NIH training grants, and I'll be using that information to update Master the T32 over the summer or into the fall. But there are lots of changes on the horizon to fellowship applications. Of course, you all know about the changes coming to scoring criteria in the R series. I'll be doing mini tutorials on that after the fall deadlines pass. And we have more information because NIH hasn't released all of their information yet. So stay tuned. We are trying to stay on top of the morass of information that is coming out of NIH right now about upcoming deadlines. So I am going to put my glasses on and start reading some of these questions. I'm sure that, like me, a lot of you are staggering into the finish line here of this is my last week of doing edits to one-on-one edits to applications in the R&K series every day, 5 to 7 days a week. I usually have about 6 weeks of that. So Friday's the last one. And then throughout the month of June, I do like 2 to 3 edits a week. So that's a little bit more manageable, which is why I'll be doing the boot camp in June. Okay, regarding the KO1 requirement to devote 75% of full-time effort or 9-person months to the KO1 activities, for faculty that have a 9-month position, how does this work out? I understand that the KO1 will pay for 9 months of your salary and require you to devote 9 months to the K activities, yet your institution can still require you to teach a class as part of the 25% remaining. But this seems to mean that the faculty is paid for 9 months only, but expected to work 12 months, 9 months for the KO1 and the remaining 25% for teaching, while only paid for 9 months of work due to having a 9-month position. Is this correct? So I'm not sure, and I would ask your program officer about that and/or your pre-award support office, because I don't do anything having to do with percent effort and salary. But having said that, really what your question is what's the denominator? If they're saying 75% effort, 75% of what? Is it 9 months or 12 months? And I can't remember an instance I've ever seen where the denominator is 9 months. I think 100% effort is generally considered 12 months. But if somebody out there has different information on that, please be sure to type it in and I will relay that to this person. But I would ask your program officer about this. And if you're at a large organization that submits many KO1s, your pre-award support office might have the answer to that. But yeah, typically, they consider 100% effort is a 12-month position. And if teaching falls into that 25%, then that's what it is. I know that there are, just for those, this doesn't answer this specific question, but on the topic of percent effort with Ks, there is some wiggle room with certain types of, and I don't think this is you, but for certain types of specialties like surgeons they can get a release in that 75% effort on the K. And typically they would be applying for like a K08 or a K23. So I don't think that's you, but yeah, I would talk to the program officer about that and see if you could get a little clarity. And then let me know. I'm interested in equipment grants, either S10 or other possibilities. Can you help direct me where to look? I did watch the previous Q&A with David Widmer. Yeah, so that's all that we have on the website in terms of the equipment grants, but I'm getting more and more questions about these. So maybe this is something, I haven't worked on an equipment grant in quite some time. In part because they tend to be lower dollar amount than the applications that I usually work on. And if an organization is going to hire somebody like me to work on an application, they tend to be like center grant applications that are, have much bigger dollar amounts, because then it justifies the expense of working with a grant writer. But if people, I keep getting questions, particularly about the S10. So if that's something that people would like to see, I'm happy to look into that and see if we can do like a more detailed mini tutorial, or if people have specific questions about the S10, please send them to us, and I can answer them in an upcoming Ask the Grant Writing Expert, and or ask David back to talk about them, because he actually has more experience with the S10 mechanism than I do from his work at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Is it permissible to use a different font color, dark blue, for example, in headings in the research strategy? Is it permissible to also use some shading behind some text to help it stand out? Yes, for sure, that is absolutely permissible. And you should have, anybody who's here has access to at least some of my courses. If you look at Master the R series, I actually have, I want to say I can't remember if it's in chapter 3, Significance and Innovation, or chapter 4, Approach, where I talk about formatting. And I actually have a slide that gives some sample formatting. And my preference, because R01s, particularly if you're doing a non-human subjects project, you have to shoehorn so much information into that 12-pager that there's typically very little white space. I know that when people learn basic grant writing, they're taught to leave pretty white space here and there. And in my experience, and in the experience of the program officers who I postdoced with, um, that those are not the grant applications that are scoring well. The ones that are scoring well are the ones that have no white space. So it's half-inch margins and 11-point font and no indenting and typically what you want is a visual break instead of white space. And the way that you can achieve visual breaks is through things like shading and using, I tend to use colored font in the approach section of the research strategy. So what I might do is shade the major subheaders, which would be A, significance, B, innovation, and C, approach. So I would use black font and then use a very light blue shading. I wouldn't use very high contrast. So I sometimes see people use like a dark blue shading or a black shading with white text. That is murder on the eyes for those of us who read 10,000 words a day. That is murder on the eyes. So try not to make it super high contrast. I tend to just use black font with a light blue shading, blue because people who are colorblind can typically see blue. And then in section C, which is going to be the bulk of your research strategy. So if you have a 12-page research strategy, the approach section might be 10 of those pages. So you might have a lot of subheaders there. Then I would have like C1 overview, C2 research team, C3 preliminary data, etc. C4 general methods, and then getting into the aims. Those I might do in like a deeper blue and light enough so that you can see that it's not black, but not so light that there isn't contrast with the page. And that is absolutely allowed. Neither of those things were allowed a number of years ago. So I don't know if you're asking because you have mentors who are telling you that it's not allowed, but I can say with confidence that I have landed tens of millions of dollars in the last couple of years using that strategy in applications. So, and I think the nice thing about it is that you have a visual break without needing white space because there's a visual break between a colored font or a shaded background. So for more details about the types of formatting that I recommend, go ahead and look at Master the R series and you'll find, you can just look at the outline for, I can't remember if it's chapter 3 or 4, but if you look at the outline, you'll see where I talk about formatting and you can zoom right into that lesson. Okay, that was kind of long-winded. I'll try to keep it a little shorter so that I can get to everybody's questions. Just to also confirm regarding the page limits for a K01, the research strategy and candidate information combined can be 12 pages. So for example, 7 pages research and 5 pages candidate. Then the training and responsible conduct of research is a separate 1 page apart from the 12 pages. That is accurate. So the 12 pages on any K, it's typically the candidate section and the research strategy summed in whole page increments. So you can't have like 4.5 and like you can't do like half pages. It's always got to be like 7 and 5 or 8 and 4. And then everything else is separate. So the training and responsible conduct, the aims page. The aims page really confuses people because if you look at the samples on the NIH website, when they display the sample application, they do the candidate section, the aims page, and the research strategy. So it looks like it's a block, but it's not. It's actually when you upload it, the aims page will be uploaded separately, and that 1 page doesn't count toward the limit either. So the 12 pages is indeed the candidate section and the research strategy. And you haven't asked this, but I'll answer it anyway because somebody else asked me this week. What should the ratio be? And typically what I recommend, and this isn't consistent with all of the samples on the NIH website, and I attribute it to the fact that the samples are older. But typically, if you have something that has a fairly significant amount of mentoring, so that would be like the K01, like yours, the K08, the K23, those I typically recommend that you do 4 pages for the candidate section and 8 for the research strategy. Maybe depending on the write-up, I would say 5 for the candidate section and 7 for the research strategy, but I wouldn't go below 7 pages on the research strategy. Typically, you want to do about 8. And then if you're applying for one of the ones where technically there isn't a mentoring plan, like the K22 or they have limited mentoring, like the K99 R00, then I would recommend 3 pages for the candidate section and 9 pages for the research strategy, because you're supposed to be a little further along at that point and demonstrating that you're pretty close to independence. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. I think I answered many questions in there, but hopefully that answered the one you were asking. Thank you for these sessions. They are very helpful. Oh, good. And I'm glad, because I know this applicant and I love working with you. So I'm delighted that that this is helpful. I have a few questions. Is there a limit for early stage R01? How many investigators, co-Is, so it does not look like there are so many people involved? Ooh, that's an interesting question. I had one reviewer ask why this is not a multi-PI plan. Why do you think, reviewer? Because it's ESI. Obviously, the other co-Is are not early stage. Another question, what is the best way to reference back the preliminary studies? Okay, so this is 2 separate questions. So Riley, don't clear this last question, because I'm going to answer them separately. So the first one has to do, and I'm going to phrase this a little more generally, because I think what you're really asking is, when I'm putting in an ESI, so let's start at the beginning. For those who don't know, early stage investigator status confers a big funding advantage, sometimes really big funding advantage to R01 applicants. It's specific to R01, it's nothing to do with Ks or small format Rs. It's a funding advantage on the R01. And in order to get this funding advantage, you have to be 10 years or less from your terminal degree or your last clinical training if you're a clinician. And you have not served as a PI on an R01 or equivalent. And in order to get this funding advantage, every PI, every principal investigator, not the co-Is, but the PIs, have to have ESI status. Therefore, applications where it might be more germane to have a multi-PI plan, sometimes people take one of the PIs and make them a co-I with a pretty significant percent effort, because that person doesn't have ESI status, and you don't want to lose the ESI status of the other PI. So reviewers recognize that this is a strategy. And it can get a little tricky, because it's not uncommon to see a set of summary statements like this person is talking about, where the reviewer is saying, how come this isn't multi-PI? Clearly, this co-investigators should be, like, they're contributing intellectually enough, in my opinion, that they should be an MPI. So this looks like a strategy to me. And it is. It is a strategy to try to get the ESI funding advantage. So some ways to deal with this. I mean, my suggestion is always, if you have enough time to put in multiple R01 applications, is to just try it. Just throw the pasta on the wall and see what sticks, and see if they buy it. If they don't buy it, if they come back and say, why is this not an MPI plan? You may need to rejig the aims so that the person who is a co-investigator or the reviewers are questioning why they're not an MPI, you may need to reduce their role, so that maybe they are doing like an exploratory aim 3 instead of half the project. So it would be narrowing the scope of the R01 so that what the solo PI who has ESI status, what you're doing is the main part of the project. And then that other co-investigator, you can legitimately drop their percent effort down low enough that they are legit, it's kosher, it's organic, they really are a co-investigator. And you can put in the future direction section that the follow-up R01 will be a multi-PI project with that co-I, and that we plan to do X, Y, and Z. So that's typically what I suggest that people do, is narrow the scope, and which is never a bad idea for a first-time R01 anyway, because most of you are over-proposing. Most of you are, going for the sun, the moon, and the stars, and it's almost always better to narrow the scope and make sure that it's doable in the time and budget allowed, or drop the timeline, go down to like a 4-year R01. And narrow the scope so that it's mostly your work. So that's really kind of the only way that you can deal with that. And then the second part of the question is, what is the best way to reference back the preliminary studies, AIM-1 prelim study or just prelim study 1, 2, 3? Okay, so this gets to the question of where are you, and again, I'll phrase it in the more general way, because I think this is what you're asking, is where do you put your preliminary data? And there are three possible places to put it, and the way that you number it will depend on where you put it. So there are three possible places, and you could choose one, two, or all three of these places. So the first place you can put it is in the significance section. You could, because there's a rigor of prior research sub-scoring criteria within the significance section. You could actually discuss your preliminary data there. That's not my preference. I prefer to keep the significance section shorter and a little more punchy and salesy and top line take home messages. And so what I usually suggest that people do is that they give the key take home messages about the preliminary data and then refer reviewers to section C approach for the details of each study. So you're kind of just capturing the highlights of each preliminary study and then sending them to section C for the details. But within section C, there are several places where you can put it as well. One is at the beginning. So again, like let's say C1 is overview, C2 is research team, C3 could be like the preliminary data or general methods or something like that, but it's going to be near the top of the C section. And those would be preliminary data that are relevant to all the aims. So there you would just typically number it preliminary study 1, preliminary study 2, or if you're tight on room, pilot study 1, or use the header preliminary study and then just say study 1, study 2, and number it that way. And or you may have preliminary studies that are relevant to a specific aim only. And in that instance, what I typically do, let's say it's for AIM-1, preliminary studies for AIM-1, I would say study 1A, 1B, or study 1.1, 1.2. So there's like a numeric designator that indicates that it's attached to a specific aim. But some people like to just number numerically straight through. And that works too. As somebody, as an outside reader, I don't necessarily find that difficult unless there are a lot of pages between the studies. But some people will list their preliminary studies at the beginning of the approach and just say 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then if they get into AIM-1 and they want to do another preliminary study that's specific to AIM-1, they'll just call it like study 5, study 6. They just keep numbering sequentially all the way through. If you have lots of studies and they're going to appear every page or two, I think that works. If you're going to have a big space between them, so like your preliminary studies mostly appear on like page 3, 4, and 5, and then another one will crop up like on page 11, I think it can be confusing for that study to be numbered like 7, just out of the clear blue sky. And by the time reviewers scroll down there, they're like, where's 1 through 6? So I think that sequential strategy can work really well when they're proximal to each other. So I know I gave you a ton of options there. Did that make sense, or is there more detailed information that you're looking for in terms of where to cover the preliminary data? Just let me know. Go ahead and type in and let me know. So I'm trying to remember if I have a tutorial coming up on that. We have our tutorials booked for the rest of the year with our guests. And I'm seeing next week I'm doing one on rigor because I have some new samples to share. I see one on the team table coming up. I'll have to look and see if I have, that might be a nice tutorial to do, is how to format using that formatting strategy, and another one about preliminary data. Okay, so the person is saying that was perfect. I will use preliminary study 1.1, et cetera. I like that way. I'm not sure why I have not thought about it. Always good to hear how you address these. So I'll tell you one of the reasons that I really like that strategy. I like numbering things in general, and I like an outline system in general for two main reasons. One of them is that applications, unlike unlike manuscripts, grant applications at NIH are discussed. People don't sit quietly in a room by themselves and read it. I mean, your assigned reviewers hopefully do, but they've read a stack of applications also. So once you get to the study section meeting, everybody's skimming to jog their memory. And if I want to speak to somebody about a specific hypothesis or a method or a study or whatever, it's really easy to do that if it has a unique designator. So this is also why I don't like to say, like under each aim, hypothesis, hypothesis, hypothesis. I usually do hypothesis 1A or 1B, hypothesis 1.1, 1.2, and then under aim 2, hypothesis 2.1, et cetera. Anytime you give something a unique identifier, it's easier to refer to it in a room of 30 people trying to discuss it. It's also easier for reviewers to refer to it in the summary statements. It just makes it easier to talk about the application if things have unique identifiers. Okay, so one last question. The K01 instructions state that all consultants should provide a letter of support. Is it okay if you have letters from the main consultants, but also have a few consultants with a small role, a few hours only, who are not yet identified by name and therefore cannot provide a letter? I'm always uneasy with people who or organizations that are not named. To be sure, it's perfectly appropriate sometimes. So, for example, the main time that works is when you are required on a new application where you're setting up a new group and you're going to need to have an advisory board and you haven't set it up yet because you don't have the grant. And, so in those instances, often the NOFO will say, it's okay if your advisory committee is to be determined and they're not named yet. In this instance, it's kind of on the border of being okay because, I mean, that is a really small role. A few hours only is like, I mean, I don't like that's a minuscule percent effort. It's like really tiny. Um, but anytime, I'll just say that like anytime you leave something as to be determined, it's going to raise a red flag for reviewers in terms of, oh my God, is this going to be some sort of stumbling block? Are they going to be able to identify who this person is? So I would say, without knowing the details of this project, if it's a consultant that does something that's fairly straightforward, and like there are many consultants who could potentially fill that role. And, think like a reviewer. Would you have questions about it? If it's something fairly straightforward and you have your choice of many consultants to choose from, to do that, then it's probably okay. But if it's something that's a little harder to find, to source, that this person is going to do, or these people, these consultants are going to do, and like if you were a reviewer, would have questions about it, then I would try to get that lined up. I just think as often as possible, try not to have things that are to be determined or to be named later, unless it's something that would not raise concerns if you were a reviewer. So sorry, I can't give a hard and fast rule on that. It might be okay, but it really depends on what the consultant is going to do and whether it will be hard for you to source that expertise. I think that's really kind of what it depends on. So think like a reviewer, you know, and maybe ask somebody more senior who knows your field. So okay, and that's it for us today. And as I said, next time, I really appreciate you guys asking all these questions because I have nothing prepared. So it's really good when you come with lots of questions. However, next time I will have something prepared. It is rigor on an R01 application, how to please reviewers and still stay within the page limits. And I have a number of new samples from recently successful applications coming up throughout the year. So there's that one later in June. I have a guest coming on, another Mount Sinai graduate, my alma mater, Mount Sinai Med School. And she'll be talking about SBIR, STTRs, and then in early July, I'll be talking about some new tables, new sample tables for the team. I'm a big fan of team tables. Yeah, so that's it. So I wish you all the very best of luck. I hope everybody is like staggering into the finish line like I am. I know I have bags under my eyes. So next time you see me, I'll be better rested and ready to kind of like face the world. This has been a long cycle, and there are lots of things coming up that are a little concerning. So, and I see somebody's typing one more question, and for aim one, is it necessary to test a hypothesis? I get this question a lot, and you don't have to have, technically, you don't have to have an aim for every hypothesis. In actuality, you don't have to have a hypothesis even for the entire project necessarily. There are some very few instances where it's like a methods development grant where I've seen people not use a hypothesis or use a really general one that states like we hypothesize that if we use these methods, we'll be able to develop an effective methodology, new methodology. But yeah, you don't have to have a hypothesis for every aim. Just to like be sensible about it and use your head. If it's something that ought to have a hypothesis, then write one. And if not, don't worry about it. So, okay. And with that, I will sign off, wishing you all the very best. And next time I see you, we'll be past the June 5th deadline. So, um, yay us. We will have made it. I'll see everybody in 2 weeks, and good luck on your grant writing. Take care. Bye-bye.